Marquise Brown, Dwayne. The artist known as Hollywood is absolutely flying up draft boards right now. ADP as the wide receiver 16 over Underdog Fantasy. He did get better in year 3, but based on his whole Ravens tenure, 2019 and 2021, he ranked 65th among 102 wide receivers in PFF receiving grade. He's 50th in yards per route run, 66th in yards per reception, 28th in targets per route run. You could argue that's the best stat of the group in terms of predicting future performance. So that is good for him. But man, Dwayne, how is he going to stand out in this room when DeAndre Hopkins didn't even stand out in this room last year? That's my problem with Marquise Brown. Right now, we are basically saying he's going to be better than he was last year, which, hey, he was a lot better with Lamar Jackson under center than Tyler Huntley and company. But when you finish 9th in the at your position in targets, I'd like to see a better finish than wide receiver 23 in PPR points per game. I understand it was Huntley. I don't know, man. Mark Andrews seemed to be just fine with those guys throwing him the football. So whatever, though. Look at the Cardinals last year. Weeks 1 through 8. DeAndre Hopkins had 46 targets. AJ Green and Antoine Wesley combined for 46 targets. Christian Kirk had 42 targets. Evans and Connor combined for 41. Rondale Moore had 35. That's like your entire offense within 10 targets of each other. What happens in weeks 13 to the wild card round? Green and Wesley combined for 59 targets. Ertz had 55. Christian Kirk had 52. Combination of Evans and Connor had 37. We want targets per route. We want that stat to be as high as possible. Rondale Moore is the only guy in the position that was higher, that was inside the top 50 last year inside this offense. Like Kirk and Hopkins couldn't have a top 50 targets per route rate. And the only reason why Rondale was in there was because he was being used in this more gadgety way. So Dwayne, I feel like with Marquise Brown, the volume, in my opinion, is far from guaranteed. Like he could just be in a mix with these guys, but we have to draft him at a massive premium to do it. And I like Marquise Brown. I think he's good. I'm not so sure he's great. So why are we going to draft him as a top 20 wide receiver?
I think he profiles almost the same as Mike Williams. I mean, we could say a lot of those same exact things about Mike Williams and his profile, but you're getting an offense that we think is going to be good. You're getting the quarterback that we think is going to be good. You're getting the potential shootouts, which we've already talked about. And so when you look at Brown, like the main thing I'm buying into, everything you said is true. And so you told me before the podcast started that you were going to bring some Marquise Brown heat. So I don't have anything to argue with on any of those though, because that's all stuff I have I've noted in his profile. Like it could go wrong, but here's what I would say. Overall, I'm just buying the young profile. This is a 25, he was the 25th pick, in the 2019 draft. So he's going into year 4. We've had a wide receiver 3 finish in year 2. We've had a wide receiver 2 finish in year 3. And then last year was really his best year. To your point on his PFF receiving grades, he is not. And so when you folks hear me talk about these benchmarks, I just probably need to clarify because we've mentioned it before. But what I've done is I've gone back and I've built out essentially like here's what the number 1 wide receiver, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like all the way down through wide receiver 60. Every 12 receivers is a new tier, right? A wide receiver 1, a wide receiver 2, a wide receiver 3. And then what I've done is I've actually pulled in those receivers and their data to see, well, what was their PFF receiving grade? What was their targets per route run? So then I can give you an average of basically wide receiver 1s usually have a PFF receiving grade of this. Wide receiver 1s typically have a targets per route run of this. They typically have a yards per route run of this. And so when you look at Brown, like in his profile, like his rookie season, even though he was a wide receiver 5, he hit the wide receiver 4 threshold for PFF receiving grade. Nothing to write home about, but he hit the wide receiver 3 level for targets per route run and yards per route run. And then we already talked about he's got the wide receiver 3, the wide receiver 2 finish. Last year was his best year. He had and now again, the biggest part that hasn't come up to your point is the PFF wide receiver grade. It was still a wide receiver 4, but his targets per route run was wide receiver 2 worthy. Now, to your point, the biggest red flag was the wide receiver 5 yards per route run, which was a 1.61. So he's been a 1.81, a 1.72, and a 1.61. So it's not a perfect profile to your point, but in the end, a former first round pick that's already had a wide receiver 3 and a wide receiver 2 finish playing on a good offense that should be in a lot of shootouts. It's very, very similar to Mike Williams. It's like, now they're different players because like obviously one is little and one is really big, but their profiles are very similar. And also the way they've historically, at least Mike Williams wasn't last year, the way they've historically been used really has been more as these explosive playmakers. Now, the ADOT did come down some. Marquise Brown has been working more around the line of scrimmage. There's a lot of different things they can do with him. So I don't really have an argument against anything that you've said. I think that there is enough there that you can be a little bit worried about the profile. I think where it becomes, tricky and you have to make your stand on Marquise Brown, and it seems like a lot of our podcasts like come down to this, is like when you get to the DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf tier,
Every
like
time.
like how do you feel about him versus those? Honestly, that's like this big dividing line. I'm like, are you above that or are you below that? Right. And so I have Mike Williams one spot above that tier, and Marquise Brown really profiles to be a very, very similar player. So it's like in the way I do my tiers, I'm trying to think about players that really are the same. I want to keep them together. And so I've got Mike Williams and Marquise Brown both sitting right next to each other. I have Williams at 15. I have Marquise Brown at 16. On Underdog, he's 7. Well, he was 17. You may have a later number on Hollywood. It's probably higher than that. He was wide receiver 17, 4 days ago.
Wide receiver 16 now. He could
Yeah, there you
look.
go.
That's the best case scenario, but I think Williams does have a higher floor. Like, look, we're talking about maybe Kyler can get to 5,000 passing yards. We haven't seen him get to 4,000. Justin Herbert just hit 5,000 last year. So to be fair, I do think Mike is much more in. Like he had a wide receiver 1 finish last year. So I hear you. Maybe Marquise could be looking ahead to it. And I have Marquise Brown ranked wide receiver 23. As long as he keeps flying up the board like this, I do think I would take DJ Moore, Cortland Sutton, even guys like Deontay Johnson ahead of him, because I'm just not overly convinced that Marquise Brown is this super high level talent, even as good as someone like Mike Williams. I mean, did you see the man, like it's just a tough look for me when you come out and he's like, oh, I wasn't a part of the Ravens system. Bro, they just gave you 140 targets and you dropped 3 touchdowns in one game against the Lions. Like, that's hard for me, Dwayne, when he's going to throw Lamar in the system under the bus, when, as Warren Sharp put out that 2-minute video, and you can see pretty clearly, and you can do this for a lot of wide receivers. So I'm not trying to totally bash Marquise Brown, but like, man, last year he had every opportunity to really cash in and do the things we want him to do. I'm not sure he's going to be afforded enough targets to be able to make that happen this year.